Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel discussion, Outside Looking In. And I'm Perry Kowalowicz. I will be your moderator. The genesis of the idea, the genesis of the talk is everybody here, undoubtedly, will never say no to the opportunity to sit at the feet of our heroes and hear the lore and the legends. It is collectively our book of Genesis, our creation story, right? But it occurred to me that there hadn't really been a panel, to my knowledge, talking about what it was like to be outside looking in. I pitched it to Bill Borsari and the VCF folks, and they graciously said yes, and to them we extend our thanks. So what we're going to do is I have a number of questions that, in full disclosure, I think everybody has had the opportunity to see, whether they saw them or not. That's a different story. And I'll tee up the questions with a little bit of a short personal comments, and then I'm going to step back. I really want this to be a discussion with a capital D. I want it to be a conversation. So with that said, I haven't told you guys this, but I'm going to throw in 3 rules. Okay? And we're going to have rules because I hope to be invited back to the 50th. Okay, so rule number 1, speak from the heart. Rule number 2, don't be shy. Let's have a conversation. There will be no turns. There will be just when the spirit moves you, grab a mic. And the final rule is, there were definitely 3 rules. Oh yeah, the 3rd rule is don't bogart that mic. Okay, those of us a certain age, there was a different word that came after that. So yeah, it's okay.
What's with the mic?
Bogart.
Missing one mic?
Missing a mic, yeah.
Okay. Now,
I can hold it.
Now, as I said, there won't be any order except for the introductions. I'll impose an order to just introduce yourselves. Okay? And then after that, the floor is a free-for-all. Okay, so once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Perry Kowalowicz. I was a co-founder of ASDG, which became Elastic Reality later on. And so some of the things that I'm very proud of is the recoverable RAM disk. And let me say just one word about that. Those of you who sent in the $10 checks for shareware, this is not really well known, but first few years of ASDG, I took no salary. So it wasn't just shareware, it was foodware and rentware. Okay? And Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Barton. You might know me from the MIDI library, the Cramden Utilities. I also worked at Digital Creations, where I was part of the DC TV team and later Brilliance.
I'm Willy Langeveld, author of VLT. It's probably my most well-known effort, but also I worked with Tom Rokicki on Maple 5 Release 3 for the Amiga, and Rex ARPLib, Rex MathLib, and that sort of stuff. And I work at Slack, and I worked back then at Slack, and now work there again. And was responsible for the 130 or so Amigas we had at Slack as scientific workstations. So that's probably enough about me.
Got it.
Oh, you got it.
Yes, we just have to share.
Let's see if it works.
Yeah.
Marco Papa. I was a student when I got the Amiga back in, I don't know, 85 or something. And I was living on campus. And probably illegally, stuff the terminal program called ATOC 3 from the dorms and shipped it for probably 2 years from the dorms. They still don't know that. After that, career as Microsoft and iOS developer, and now I teach at USC after 40 years.
My name is John Faust. I was working at a company that made Commodore 64 software and PC MIDI software, and we were working with the Atari Amy chip for sound. And I was just entranced with the Amiga when I read its descriptions, and I became an early developer. But I became a writer more than I became a software developer for the first few years. So if you ever read Amazing Computing magazine, I wrote hundreds of articles for that magazine, and Info and Compute and Amiga World. And one of the first articles that I wrote, I'm going to talk about later at the panel.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Avery, and when I graduated high school, I really wanted a computer with a Motorola 6800. I approached it from the bottom up. I had an Apple II Plus, and I sold my beloved computer to partially fund the Amiga 1000 that I bought in the first shipment that came to our city. And then I went off to college and learned most of my stuff from other people on Usenet, and we'll talk about that later, I think. And after a brief stint porting games to the Amiga and the Atari ST, I had a 68K, I could do it. After a brief stint of that and kind of school not working out so well, Perry's company had moved to Madison and were just looking for a software developer. And so I was the first software developer hired at ASDG, and we really got heavy into imaging, and we'll talk about that later too.
Hi, my name's John Hare. I'm a game designer and creative team leader of game development teams. I come from UK. Our experience with the Amiga is entirely as a games machine to make games like an early games console. I've been making games from 1985 to now, so it's my 40th year this year, all the formats all the way through. The Amiga was definitely the golden era for us, and we were lucky enough to be like pop star developers. By that I mean we had a number of #1 games, and in that Amiga period for us, launched later than here, like Amiga games were from 89 to 97, even 97 we were making Amiga games, but the key period, June 92 to June 95, with different games for us, Sensible Soccer, Cannon Fodder, Megalomania, and a couple of others. We were #1 for 52 weeks of that 3-year period in the games charts. So for us, and that was led by the Amiga. So the Amiga was very much for us in Europe like a leading game format. And we weren't the only big team. Sensible Software, my team, there were many other big teams, Benmac Brothers, Psygnosis, etc. But yeah, that was our experience.
Okay. So you guys jumped the gun a little bit on the first question. That's okay, but I was going to ask, well, in '84, I looked around. I was actually teaching Unix internals to Bell Labs people of all folks. And I was looking around, and I decided I had to go into business. I looked around, and I literally had the thought, I could do this at least as well as those morons. And I looked at the PC, forget it. I looked at the Mac, and okay, well, at least it had a map display, okay. But I heard about this machine, Amiga, and it's like color, all right, sound, and preemptive multitasking. And thanks to this man here, Carl, and I will say, I'm going to make him blush again, I hope. The Amiga folk and the Commodore folk are heroes, but to me, taller than the rest is Carl. So thank you, Carl. I figured, a machine like this, it can't miss, right? So that's what brought me to the Amiga. Could you folks take it away with some more information about what really drew you to the machine? Anybody?
Sure, why not? So 1985 came around, I had just done my PhD, and I needed to get myself a present. And so there were two choices in my mind. One was this new computer I had seen in Byte magazine, which had multitasking and color graphics. And there was the other option was to get an 8-inch Meade telescope. And the fortunate thing was that this was October, November, and I said to myself, am I really going to sit out there in the cold, in the middle of the night, looking at stars? And I decided to buy the computer, and in January 1986, I got the computer, and that changed my life.
As I said, I was still in school, and I had access to, I remember, IBM PCs and LSI 11. Those were the units that I was using, and I saw this machine, and it looked just fantastic from the graphics and all that. So I asked my PhD advisor, can you fund to buy the computer? And he says, nah, no, sorry, not interested. And then I found out that I had a $300 educational discount. And so I think my salary as a teaching assistant was $800 a month. And I was able to actually pay for that, I guess, $900 and something for the Amiga.
I admired the very expensive high-end computer graphics that I saw at University of Wisconsin-Madison, mostly devices that were connected to even more expensive mainframes. But at night, and for my day job at the Commodore 64 software company, there was that whole distinct excitement about the Commodore 64 or even the Ataris as being bright and colorful and active and motion, as compared to the monochrome green screens of the IBM PC world, or even the Macintosh did not seem very colorful at that point.
Yeah, it was. and then I had friends who had Macintoshes, and again, it was a 68K computer. It was enticing, but I looked at the programming manuals and the toolbox, and I said, ugh, no, I don't want this. And then I don't remember where I first read about it. It could have been Byte, but I think that was later, so somehow I learned that the Amiga was coming out, and I read about it, and absolutely, I had used time-sharing computers. I first used a computer in the mid-'70s as a kid, and so I was familiar with what's possible. And then I saw, hey, this personal computer, now has the preemptive multitasking, and I didn't know all the details, like all the shared memory and the issues that come with that. But anyway, it was great, and the graphics coming from the Amiga and coming from the Apple II and having played games growing up, it was like, yeah, I needed this, so I made it happen.
Well, coming from a game developer's perspective, I started off in '85. The first game I made was on the ZX81, which was pretty basic. And then we moved quickly to a game on the Spectrum, then a few games on the Commodore 64, and we had a couple of #1 games across Europe. So our team, Sensible Software, is pretty well known all over Europe, but did nothing in the States. Literally, we were non-existent in the States and Japan during this whole time for whatever reason. But when the Amiga came out, our first experience was we made a game called International 3D Tennis. Now my partner, Chris, there was two of us running the company. He wanted to push the Commodore 64 as a programmer. He was now a master at it to get 3D out of it. And he was pushing the Commodore 64 to do 3D. And we did his 3D tennis game. And it looked like a weird Czech cartoon from the 70s, to be fair. But the players were called like Boris Becker and Stefan Edberg and all the great tennis players of the day. But the point is, that's the first game we did on the Amiga, so we then ported it across to the Amiga as our first time in the water. And then we started to make Megalomania, WizKid, Sensible Soccer, Cannon Fodder, our well-known games. And for me as a designer and an artist, because I was doing all the design and art at the time, the opportunity the Amiga gave was staggering. So graphically, obviously, the jump from the Commodore 64 to the Amiga is considerable. You don't need to do these blocky, weird bricks to get color in, which was really hard on the Commodore 64 to use blocky bricks, right? So it looked amazing. But it was the fact it was self-contained. So delivering stuff on the hardware was easy because the machine was self-contained, and the amount of memory we had to create universes, like to create Sensible World of Soccer, the game I got an award for yesterday, is a massive game. 15,000 football teams all over the world, 25,000 players all tracked, so 1,500 teams, 25,000 players. The detail, we were the first game to have black players and white players on the same team. Why? Because people were lazy and used one sprite before, right? Now we can make multiple sprites, because as a sports fan, I want the guys on the pitch to look like they really look like in real life. So, the beauty of this period when we had this time was what came after it was the early 3D games. And that was a disaster, because this is pre-Unreal and Unity. You know, as a game designer, it's like, right, now we're going to make a 3D game, and then for a year, the screen is black. Because the coders are working on the engine, and all of the designers and the artists couldn't work, you know. So we flipped from those Amiga years when it was 75% design and 25% tech, because the tech had all been done by all you guys. It flipped. Now it was like 75% tech, and us designers and artists had the last 25% of the time, if we're lucky, to make a game on something we could now see. So yeah, that was my experience. It was just a golden period. And also, it was, the publishing was not controlled. So these days you make a game, Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, they vet your game. This was just a free platform for us. So it was the perfect creative freedom, and technically it freed us up as well. So that's why it was such a great machine for us. That's why so many developers loved the Amiga as a game machine.
So, Bill, did you go?
No, I haven't. I thought I would just ring in at the end here. So I had been just a year out of college when we first had seen the Amiga and the Atari ST that came out about the same time. And the guy that I was in a band with, he had a computer consulting gig where he's making money, and I was out of college and kind of still in academic mode, so I didn't care about making money, and I was living in my folks' house, so hooray. Anyway, I had experience with computer graphics prior to that and 68,000s, and here was this machine that was like way better than anything I'd ever seen at college, and I could own one and program for it, and it had a serial port, and it could run at MIDI baud rates, and so hey, MIDI was only like 3 years old then. The band that I was in was a synth pop band. We had a ton of keyboards that all could be connected by MIDI, but nothing to like change the programs on every single one of those for each song, and so, you know, I started kind of trying to solve these problems, and it's kind of where I got into it. Is that a good enough on-ramp story?
Yep, very cool, very cool. So moving on, the first few moments that I had the machine, unboxing it, the unboxing experience, I filled the screen with clocks, and I filled the screen with the lines demo, and I played for hours with Speech Toy. Just seeing the clocks moving together instead of one and then the next, once again, preemptive multitasking. That's what my first few hours were like. So guys, could you tell us about your first couple of hours with the machine, that first day?
I think that pretty much covers it. I did all those things too. I think I didn't know how to make the demos stop, but I knew how to drag screens. So I was kind of inadvertently pushing the multitasking by starting another demo while the previous one was still running. And, you know, I didn't notice that there was anything wrong with that. So, you know, thanks, Carl.
I agree with Bill. There was nothing else to do, and I think you should phrase it that way. But I will add one thing that I did that I continued to use through the rest of my experience. You could change your mouse pointer. And I drew a cute little gecko, and I kept that mouse pointer for the rest of my career. But that was it. Unless you could buy something, or you could get it off of the internet, or get it from a public domain disk. And those were pretty rare in '85. You didn't have anything else to play with apart from those demos that came on the floppies that came with your system.
Yes, absolutely. Same here. My experience was a lot like Perry's. I was marveling at the ability to run so many things at once, and the graphically intensive stuff, like you said, the lines demo and the filling and everything, and you know, and dragging screens and switching between them. And at the time, I loved RJ's choice about the right mouse button menu just being at the top rather than connected to the Windows, because the Mac was a pain to use for that. And yeah, that was a lot of it. And John's absolutely right. That's all we could do for a little while, and I wasn't connected to the internet yet. Like I said, I bought it before I got to college, and we just had BBSs. I didn't have an external modem yet, so I wasn't connected. So that's what I had.
Well, I mean, to put it in today's terms, let me see, between the developer's license and my first Amiga with an extra floppy drive, I had to spend about $2,000 in '85,
Yep.
which is what, $8,000 today?
Yeah.
So you buy an $8,000 computer and you can't do anything with it for many months?
But we still wanted it, and we got it.
Yes, well,
Would you do it again?
But who's the old guy? Oh, Dale. You know, Dale, I am always convinced that Facebook is listening to us. And this morning, it delivered a reel to me from an interview with Orson Welles, where he talked about the confidence of ignorance. And I was just a pup back then. I was 23, 24 years old. And I would say, yes, absolutely, I would do it again, if only I had that confidence of ignorance.
So my experience, briefly, when we made this international 3D tennis game and we converted it to the Amiga, the guy we'd got to do the conversion was, we come from near Cambridge in England, like the university town, and he was one of the students at Cambridge, and he'd actually made a few fairly well-known games on the Commodore 64 beforehand. So the first time I saw an Amiga was entering his dorm room in the university with the curtains still drawn at about 2 in the afternoon, and seeing through a marijuana cloud the Amiga in the distance with the game on. And that's the first time I saw one.
so yeah, so I of course also tried all the things that came with the machine, and that lasted about 5 minutes, and then I decided, well, now it was time to start going on programming this thing. And what did I have? Well, I had Amiga Basic, and I figured that was, after about 5 minutes of that seemed very slow. I actually built a little program that could go through my 300 baud modem to Slack, to the mainframe, download a picture, and in BASIC I could make that, you know, one of those Tektronix type pictures, and I could draw that in BASIC. That took about half an hour, and that was just too slow, and so I started looking around for a compiler, and to my horror I found that you couldn't really get a Fortran compiler for this thing. So I had to learn C at that point, and so that's how I got into C.
I was in an academic environment, so I had access to Usenet, if people remember what Usenet was back then. And I didn't write anything until like a couple of months later. But in the meantime, I spent probably days discussing with everybody else that was on Usenet what developer environment were you going to be using, what languages you're going to be using, and all that. C, of course, ended up being the language, and fortunately, I knew C because that was the language back then in the 80s when you were in school. So, but nothing until a couple of months later. I played with it, like everybody else said.
And I do think we're going to talk more about it later, but yeah, after my first, slightly later, after my first semester at college, where they didn't seem to know what C was, because they were throwing Pascal down our throats and other older, it was, anyway, undergrad there was interesting. That's when I bought my Kernighan and Ritchie and taught myself C, and you know, we got the compiler, and I had already gotten the manuals and all that, so that part was later for me, but.
So Perry, is the next question about being a developer?
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. But first I want to embarrass us all, which is actually germane, in a way. In the earliest days of development, floppy-based development, and here you can see the genesis of ASDG's first software product, which was called FAC, Floppy Accelerator, which came before the virtual recoverable RAM disk. So compiling had a certain sound, but linking So what I'm going to ask the panel to do is to together, all of us together, do your best impression of the sound that the computer would make, the floppies would make, linking. Are you ready? No, compiling was but linking was 4 hours maybe, you know. So anyway, I wanted to embarrass you, us all. But with that said, so come on, who had that experience?
I used Ramdisk. I didn't link off of floppies.
Well, and speaking of that, so again, broke new college student. Yeah, very shortly after I started using the compiler, I got the 256K expansion, and I got a second drive because it was single floppy drive, and I was trying to use the RAM disk, but there are limitations.
I found my notes, hello.c, hello world, took 2 minutes and 20 seconds to compile and link on floppy, and 20 seconds of it was the compiler, and 2 minutes of it was the linker.
There you go.
Exactly.
There you go.
And one of my proudest moments at the beginning was having gotten the compiler working, finding on CompSci Amiga, or CompOS Amiga, I guess it would have been. Perry's friend Eric Levitsky posted some sample code because nobody knew how to program this thing. And there was some sample code, and when I got that compiled and got the output and I ran that, it was amazing. And I don't think it did anything.
Yeah.
Yes, I was very happy to get my first hard drive, which was, I think, $500, and it was 40 megabytes. It was huge.
Bought the big one.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so it's a Seagate, 5¼ inch. It was huge.
I think the most common was the 20 meg at that time, so you
Yes,
did
it was.
upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember anxiously waiting the release of hard drives for the 1000, and I don't think I ever actually saw one until I got a 2000, and then like the world changed. But yeah, prior to that, yeah, diskettes were frustrating, but thanks to clever people, there were ways of making it less frustrating.
And despite everything we were just saying about the perils of that, thanks to these guys, they were still the fastest floppy drives on any personal computing platform at the time.
Yeah, I had two floppy drives from the get-go, and the 512 and the 256 expansion. But I think I had one of these microbotics things that would allow you to hook up a SCSI drive, and that's how I got my first hard drive.
I think about it in comparison to what happened before. Like the big brick drive on the Commodore 64. We made one game called Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit, and we had it all in one load. It's interesting, we had it all in one load in the UK, and in the US, this brick drive had come out, and we didn't need to use it. And they said, we've hooked up the brick drive, and why isn't the game using the thing? It's like we do it all in one load. So we had to fake the light coming on. The only software we did, we faked the light coming on like it was saving. And another thing is that before that, we had the micro drive on the Spectrum. Did anyone ever use a Spectrum here, ZX Spectrum? The micro drive, you only had to breathe on it or think about breathing on it, and the thing failed, right? So it was all a lot better than that stuff.
Okay. So let's get into the actual experience. One of the things that I'm really hoping that I can get across is throughout this conference talking about the Amiga, it's been community, 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 right? So community was absolutely paramount in the development of, well, in the creation of the developer community. So let me tee this question up. I remember a night after many long hours with my friend Eric, mentioned by Aaron, and we got the string gadget working. And naively, I turned to him. We were in New Jersey at the time. I was in New Jersey. I did a pen sentence there. And I turned to him and I said, Eric, I bet you we're the first people on the East Coast to have the string gadget working. So what was your first early win?
I was trying to remember that. I remember there was lots of little wins all along the whole Amiga experience, but you know, I think really the first one was just discovering the CLI, and it's like getting to look behind the curtain of the workbench and sort of seeing how things were put together. And this is before I had like a manual of how all the commands worked, or any of the ROM kernel manuals, or any of this programming stuff. Really, it was just like a way to explore the system. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yep.
Yeah, my first win was actually earlier than that. I was on BIX already, on the Byte Information Exchange, and I found that there were a lot of executables that were too large to fit in whatever storage medium they had on the Byte Information Exchange, and so they were split up into several different parts. I think it was like 16K or 32K was the maximum that you could download. Also, it had to do with, you know, X modem downloads. You know, they failed quite often, and so you know, you had to try it over and over again if it was a very large file. So they split them up in smaller files so that you could compare and make sure that it all worked. Anyway, I had to be able to. The first program that was written in, so it was an executable or an archive. I mean, you first have to get the archiver, and then you have to get the archive that you want. But the archiver itself was an executable, and it was too large, and so you had to put it back together first before you could run it. And so I wrote a thing in BASIC. I wrote a BASIC splitter and combiner to do that. And then I uploaded the BASIC splitter combiner up to BIX for other people to download, because that was small enough that it could be downloaded in one go. And well, next day I got an email an email on BIX from Joanne Dow asking me to become a moderator on BIX. So, you know, that's how I became the Amiga.user moderator. Anyway, so that was my first win.
So yeah, you mentioned, you said first big win. There were plenty of little ones, but it's relevant. I'll try to make it really quick. When I interviewed with Perry, as I said, I was I was out of school. I was in college, but it wasn't working out, so I really needed the job. Yeah, Perry came up with a remarkably good interviewing technique. What he did was he gave me a project to do. And he said he would pay me for my time. Okay, this is an honorable man. And a whopping $7 an hour, which wasn't too bad, but it was less.
I wasn't getting anything.
Yeah, I know, you weren't, no salary, but it was less than the UW paid me when I was younger. And so anyway, speaking of preemptive multitasking, the project was to write 2 separate programs, one of which would open a window and would take mouse input, and a different program that would open up and through inter-process communication would take those mouse coordinates and display what the mouse coordinates were. So it was a really, really intelligent choice of a reasonably sized project that really showed whether you understood what the Amiga was capable of, how to program it, had to deal with all kinds of technical things that would show whether you really cared what you were doing. And the final version still had a bug, and neither of us noticed.
Did he give you a raise at that point?
Take it back.
Did he give me a raise? No, I think that was my salary for a while. But there was a little bit of overtime that first year, and it paid all of it.
My first win was early stages of writing ATOC terminal emulation, where there wasn't really not yet VT100 or anything, just a line. And I was able to get a prompt from a VAX and remotely log in without emulation, really. But yeah, I could actually get into the machine. exactly remember.
All I got to say is I'm an artist, designer, and team leader, right? My job is to listen to these great tech guys and to not even interfere with the conversation, so that's part of my role. Nothing to say.
You know, Perry, I couldn't really think of what my first programming win was, but I would say that my first, and I realize it was, to benefit myself and to get my name out there, I created public domain discs. Everybody knows Fred Fish, and I know we're going to talk about that. But
That's the next question.
oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. As a matter of fact, the Fred Fish freely redistributable software collection, somewhere is documented I was the actual, coined the term fish disc. I mean, it's obvious, right? But his name was really a mouthful. I was on fish disc number 1 with a Newton's cradle, which, by the way, was per pixel shaded, as you would get it today. And I was on total 9 discs. And Fred was an extremely dear friend of mine, and I miss him a great deal. And I was going to ask, talk to us about Fred, but John correctly and appropriately pointed out that he also had a carefully and lovingly curated collection. So instead of asking about Fred, let's turn the question into, let's talk about these disc collections and the software collections and their impact on early development and even later on.
Fred was an awesome dude, and he had a much better Usenet connection and connection to academia and the Silicon Valley crowd. And this was the only way that you could get software for a lot of people. Dial-up was not as common, or it was very expensive. I mean, if you tried to use CompuServe in 1985, you were paying, you can complain about ads on the internet now, but if you wanted to get, your 1200 baud modem connection to CompuServe, you're paying the equivalent of $30 or $40 an hour. Yep. In today's dollars. It was very expensive to even be able to browse around in text and to be able to download things. And so I knew I wanted to create public domain disks. I didn't make any money off of it, but Amazing Computing did, and it's very similar to, it's very similar to your story about the recoverable RAM disk. I think that those public domain disks kept the magazine afloat for the first few months, because they were selling disks for, a 3.5-inch floppy disk cost what in '85? $3 or $4, the equivalent of like $20 today. And so people would buy these discs through the magazine. They'd print the list of all the programs that were on them, and that kept that magazine afloat in the beginning. But this was really a tremendous way to see what the people in the world really were creating on the Amiga, and to be able to share it and to not have to pay $40 an hour to get to it.
How did you get all the software to be delivered to you?
My family will laugh at this point, but I think I do have a lot of the submissions still in the warehouse. I got them by mail, sometimes from people around the world, and I would collect them and copy them to floppies and write up those descriptions and make a master that would get sent off, and that's how Fred spread them, certainly. Yeah.
Local computer clubs tended to have libraries of these discs too, and I don't remember if they would just give you a disc for a few dollars or if you had to copy them or how it worked. But I have to remember there really wasn't an online repository of these things except maybe some expensive dial-up, and you do the math at 120 bytes per second to download 1 megabytes diskette worth of stuff. It's astronomical and costs a lot, and very time-consuming. Yeah.
Duplicating, right.
Members would bring an extra drive, and you would take each in, and there would be 4 or 5 systems, each with
64 drive, copy and fish disks from all meetings.
That was an essential, user group meetings were essential to the development of that early community. Eric Levitsky again and I founded JOG, Jersey Amiga User Group, and our first meeting was a week after FOG, which stood for First Amiga User Group, and so we were number 2.
I'd like to talk about a related subject, which is, from the gamer's perspective, is piracy and what these discs enabled. And I got asked a question by someone that I didn't have the answer to at the time, which was the piracy value of stuff, but I calculated it. So our game, Sensible World of Soccer, which is our best game, which won this award yesterday, probably one of the best-selling games on the Amiga, obviously all around Europe. We launched versions between 92 and 96, 97, I think was the last one, maybe 95, 96, and we sold about 2 million copies, okay? So I owned the company 50-50, me and my partner just split the money when we had some spare, and in general I made £1 per copy from a $20 retail price. £20 retail price in the UK. So that means that I made £2 million, great. But the piracy rate was 20 to 1. So it means I didn't make 40 million, okay? But that's only my pound. You multiply that up by the £20 retail price, it was actually like 800 million value at retail that was pirated, which would be over $1 billion, be like $1 and a bit billion. From that, that'd be about 1.4, 1.5. That's one game, okay? Many iterations of one game. So the piracy open, this is, I think SWOS is probably one of the most pirated games of all time, okay? And I see it as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, piracy made the game very popular, which means we can win awards like we won yesterday, which is great. But financially, it didn't work. So it's quite interesting those times. And now, of course, the copy protection was such a big deal in those days. You'd get copy protection and hackers, and they'd be fighting each other. But it's interesting, the street value of what was lost often doesn't get spoken about. It was very considerable when you consider, I'm talking about over $1 billion on one game franchise. So.
Well, we weren't pirating, of course. We were keeping our noses clean, so to speak, and handing out the public domain stuff. Yeah,
it's just what it enabled for less. It's what it enabled for less scrupulous people. Yeah?
I think you should blame the floppy drive makers.
Yeah, it's their fault.
And the real people who made money were Sony selling floppies to us. That's right.
Everybody had a go?
Well, okay, yeah, so fish disks, yes, they were very important, and I remember those days where there were many Amigas stacked up in the user groups making copies. And that's how I got most of mine early on. But later on, there were also the fish disks, the fish CD-ROMs. And I remember that at one point, I actually have an email from Tom, I think, Tom Rokicki, to Fred Fish, saying that he was sharing the subscription to the Fish CD-ROMs with me, because the Fish CD-ROM always contained the same stuff plus new stuff. And so I would get it one month and Tom would get it the other month. And so that was how that worked out. So that was kind of cool.
So I just have a little anecdote that I just kind of popped into my mind. There was some Amiga developers conference that I was at, and we got fortune cookies that were all very Amiga-centric. And I got the fortune that says, "May you live to see fish disc number 10,000."
And yeah, as somebody without any money and everything, I know it was all public domain, but it cost something. Yeah, the user groups and the sharing and just knowing what was out there and getting access to them once in a while was really useful to me.
Yes, absolutely essential. It was, one of the first acts of the United States Congress, United States government, was to establish the post office. And if you think about it, that is what bound the country into a country. The ability to communicate. And it was the John's disc collection and Fred's disc collection that really bound us together in ways that otherwise, and also taught us. Everything I put on the disks, except for the recoverable RAM disk, was in source code.
And there could be text on the disk, of course, too.
Yeah.
Right? It was.
Yeah. So, hey, some of you guys mentioned BICs. Let's talk about the impact of the early, let's call them social networks. But we had the Well, we had BICs, we had CompuServe, we had, oh, I'm forgetting one that was very common. There was like
Quantum Link, Delphi, Genie, Amiga Link. You remember all those?
So,
People Link.
Oh, yeah.
now, I'll share one little story. I'm in New Jersey. The Well is in the Bay Area. And I was on the Well a lot. And you might wonder, in those days of long distance being extremely expensive, how did I do it? Well, did I mention earlier that I was working at AT&T? And I would dial into one of the local modem pools, and from there log into a modem pool in like Chicago, and from there I would log into a modem pool in the Bay Area. And I would be logged in to the Well from their perspective as a local phone call, from my perspective as a local phone call. Now, the part that I maybe shouldn't mention, and if you think about it, that is what bound the country into a country, the ability to communicate. And it was the John's disc collection and Fred's disc collection that really bound us together in ways that otherwise, and also taught us. Everything I put on the disks, except for the recoverable RAM disk, was in source code.
And there could be text on the disk, of course, too.
Yeah.
Right? It was.
Yeah. So, hey, some of you guys mentioned BICs. Let's talk about the impact of the early, let's call them social networks. But we had the Well, we had BICs, we had CompuServe, we had, oh, I'm forgetting one that was very common. There was like
Quantum Link, Delphi, Genie, Amiga Link. You remember all those?
So,
People Link.
Oh, yeah.
now,
People.
I'll share one little story. I'm in New Jersey. The Well is in the Bay Area. And I was on the Well a lot. And you might wonder, in those days of long distance being extremely expensive, how did I do it? Well, did I mention earlier that I was working at AT&T? And I would dial into one of the local modem pools, and from there log into a modem pool in like Chicago, and from there I would log into a modem pool in the Bay Area. And I would be logged in to the Well from their perspective as a local phone call, from my perspective as a local phone call. Now, the part that I maybe shouldn't mention is we were just starting out and had no marketing budget. So in the very best spirit of guerrilla marketing, I might ask a question in California and answer it in New Jersey to get the conversation going. So talk to us about the impact of the early networks.
There was a BBS at Amiga in the very early days, right? Dale?
I
Don't remember that? I know there was a dial-up machine at Amiga that developers could get into. And all of those companies, I mean, the Well was different because it was a bridge between Usenet and the public dial-up networks. And
Usenet, yes.
Right, yes, right. That's why you were on the Well, because you wanted Usenet, right?
Well, I had it through AT&T.
Through work as well, yeah, okay. A lot of us used the Well because it was a bridge to Usenet. There was a primitive gateway on CompuServe. But all of those other companies were in the business of making money. They did want to charge you per hour to be able to be there. But they were, they were public forums where you could go and talk about things. Some of us are physical pack rats, Dale. I'm also a digital pack rat. I did save all of my dial-up transcripts. I have a database of 500,000 CompuServe Amiga messages.
Oh, my.
And I will say I tried to. So yeah, most of my during the Amiga times, the early Amiga times, most of it was Usenet because I was at college and I had free access, and it was amazing to have that. It was perfect. But I was already familiar with that stuff because when we bought our Apple II back in '79, some of these things did exist, and I don't know if any of you ever remember a thing called The Source. Maybe? Okay, nobody. Yeah. It predates CompuServe, and it was very similar to CompuServe, and it gave access to all these amazing databases and world history and amazing things for a youngster who just never had access to that stuff except for Encyclopedia Britannica. But because we had a modem, and the modem came with free access to the source, which, as everybody said, was really expensive, I used that so much in that year of free access. But yeah, then it was absolutely Usenet. And some BBSs, and I once I was working, I'm pretty sure I was on Bix, and contributing to that community.
I was 722337, 135 on CompuServe. What about you?
I was never on CompuServe.
Was there, did CAS, the Common Amiga Technical Support, have a...
That was in Westchester, right?
There was the Amiga...
Oh, Dale, please. There.
So as I recall, I'm Dale Luck. So as I recall, there was the Amiga node, there was CBM VAX, and at one time there was like a fast connection for sending stuff from the East Coast to the West Coast and back by going to the Amiga node, and we had a direct connection to CBM VAX. And so we would see traffic going between those two that was unrelated to what we were doing.
It talked to a son in Los Gatos?
It talked to a son in Los Gatos, a son too, I think, and then it had a direct connection right out to the phone number at CBM VAX. But my main question, so do you remember email access, or there was... For, like it was on UUNet, there's Amiga, Bang, CBM VAX was a path. Yep. And then there was, I'm trying to remember back then, email addresses. There was Dale at Amiga.
Yeah,
you had to do your own routing.
Right, you had to do your own routing.
I was going to say,
machine, Bang, this machine.
Yeah, if I explained to you guys the inner workings of how Usenet and email worked back then, you would think I was lying. You would think there's no way they did that. But yeah, all of us who posted on Usenet and all, what our email addresses looked like was, okay, starting from a main node that you'd recognize the name of, here is the path to all the computers to which it connects to finally get to the computer that you do email on. It was unbelievable.
On your phones, look up Bang path.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Bix for a second, though, so with that microphone, so Bix was really important. I'll tell you why.
Early on, Byte came by Amiga, and they said, hey, we're giving you all free Bix accounts. Right. And so Dale had one, I had one, RJ had one, we all had Bix, and so we were on Bix a lot. So that was, for us, was one of the main gateways to getting information out to anyone that had questions about it. I don't know how many other people had Bix accounts, but it was really, it was really useful for developers because it was a gateway directly to us.
And I'm going to jump in one thing. Downstairs, there's the exhibit on emojis, 1999. 1985, Joanne Dow on Bix.
Joanne Dow helped facilitate it so much. She was great.
yes, Bix was probably, Bix was most definitely my first, Facebook, Twitter, all of those things. So that was the only social media I had, and I have to confess I spent way too many hours on Bix. Sometimes until deep in the night, having chats with people. I mean,
and flaming wars on Usenet.
Oh,
That's coming next.
I did not. I was not really on Usenet. I was on Bix, and that was pretty much it. And we had the Amiga.dev. We had several different Amiga conferences there. There was the Amiga .user conference, and there was the Amiga.dev conference. And so I think there was a lot of you guys I remember from Bix also.
For some reason in our office, we remained blissfully unaware of Bix, which was absolutely brilliant for our productivity making games, so I'm really happy we didn't have it.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on Bix too, and I was between Amiga stuff or Babylon 5. That was kind of like, you know. And I reluctantly gave up that Bix account long after I'd stopped doing Amiga stuff. I think it was just because I had other accesses to the internet. I think I was working at 3DO by then too. Anyway, Bix was great.
And yeah, I didn't do as much online then, but yeah, I grew up in the BBS era, so I had been doing BBS access and just digital communication for many years before that.
Now, Marco mentioned Flame Wars. Let's talk about Flame Wars. On June 26, 1990, Tom Limoncelli wrote a posting entitled, "The Top 10 Ways to Lose a Net Fight." Flame War. Now, number 4 was, and I read verbatim, argue with Perry Kowalowicz about ... well, almost anything. But number one was argue with Marco Papa about copyright law. So let's talk about Flame Wars. Anybody, go on, jump in.
Regarding copyright law, so I have my story on that one. So at some point, my wife and I could not deliver the software. I mean, we had a shrink wrapping machine. We were duplicating disks manually. And so we licensed the software to a company in Long Beach called Oxy. And I don't know if you remember the company. They develop a whole bunch of different software. And that relieved us from creating manuals, printing boxes, duplicating disks, and all that. And it was an okay contract for a year. And then I think they started having problems, and they stopped paying royalties. All of a sudden, we kept on asking them for the money, and then the money didn't come. So we had a good contract, which I found through Usenet, by the way. So we sent them a notice, you know, you don't pay, we're going to cancel the contract. And at the same time, I sent them an update of the software. And the update had a time bomb in it. So at the second notice, they didn't pay, the time bomb hit. They'd already effectively sent the update everywhere, and the software stopped working. So they had, I don't know, 100,000 units already inboxed in the channel. So they sued us, okay? And we sued them back for copyright violation of the contract. The contract had an arbitration clause. So they were incorporated in Texas. So we had to go to Austin, Texas, to argue with the 3 judges, which were part of the arbitration group. These guys show up, Texas, tall guys, you know, those cowboy boots, the hat and everything. And we were there with big posters and all that. We argued our case. We won the case. Not only that, the guy said, well, you know, you either destroy, the company has to destroy all the copies of all the manuals and all that, or actually we think you're going to send it to them. So all of a sudden, a month later, a pallet shows up at my door, which was difficult to get into the house, with 100,000 manuals, all flat, of course, 100,000 disks, and 100,000 boxes. And I guess I went back and put them back together, but I didn't have to duplicate them.
So he won his copyright battle on the internet.
Yes, he did. And I have a story similar. So may I, folks? Okay. One of the ASDG hardware products was an Ethernet board. And we had a number of hardware products that had very, very straightforward names. We had a board that had 2 serial ports. It was called the dual serial board. Okay, marketing, wow. But we had one product that had an awesome name. It was our Ethernet card, 10BASE-T. And one day we get a cease and desist letter from an enormous company, enormous, who had based their giant product on the same name. I'm not mentioning who because they're still out there. Fortunately, we had the opportunity to send them a cease and desist letter because we had it first. And we said in that letter, you are welcome to buy, we're willing to sell you the name. So after that, that's why today you have the inspired EB920. It was the Ethernet board designed in 1992. But it used to have a really cool name. Right? Flame Wars. That's where
I never got into any flame wars.
Now, to be the top of Flame Wars, again, whatever you want to call it, but I do remember I spent hours at night on these, probably more than programming, just flaming.
Anonymity brings out the best and the worst in people.
I mean, is it really a flame war if you're right?
Yes, because everybody thinks that's true.
Okay, so let me turn to a serious moment. Commodore Amiga Technical Support, CATS, based out of Westchester. They were our resource. They were our friends. So let me give a shout out, and then I'll turn it over to you folks, and give a shout out to the people who were most important to you. And I'm definitely going to say Carolyn Shepner.
I will definitely second that.
Yeah, number one, no question about it.
Yeah, same here. When he asked that question, that was the first name popped into my head.
I also want to mention Gail Wellington. Gail Wellington.
Yep, Gail.
Yeah, I also mentioned Gail in the same response. And ancillary to that, I pointed out that not only did they give us access to the official support people in CATS, but were generous enough to often give access to the internal developers and form some online, kind of online friendships. And the names I brought up were my friend Randall Jessup. And I was extremely happy to see my friend Peter Cherna here as well.
Okay. Let's see, I got one here. Let's see, where was it? Okay, the developer community itself. Often we were competitors, but always we were friends. Everybody knew everybody. And there's kind of a practical reason for that, because we might be using our quote competitors' products in our daily work. And if anybody had a bug, as you know, the machine went down. So we could always call up their personal number and talk to them about it. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the A1000, if programmed correctly, would stay up for hundreds, perhaps even up, in one case, 1,000 days without crash. It's because we all talked to each other and we helped each other debug our programs. So if you would, panel, talk to the audience about the camaraderie, the feeling as a developer.
I can talk as a game developer, which is slightly different, but related. So in the UK, we were the leading country for making games as things that ran on the Amiga. And there was maybe, I don't know, 10, 12, 15, up to 20 companies we're making this stuff and making good money, and we're well known by people, and we would talk to each other, but at the same time we were competitors, you know. So you'd share technical knowledge, or we'd share knowledge about contracts, like this publisher will offer you 25% royalty and 100,000 advance, and we'd compare those to push together and work out how to push it all up for our favor. But we were competitors. Now there's a company called the Bitmap Brothers, who are another famous British developer, and we were kind of competing for attention from the magazines at the time we were pushing the games. And they got there first, and I remember them standing there with a shot with them in front of a helicopter, like on the top of a big building, and we were jealous. And in our phone book, in the old Sensible Software office, it says the Bitmap Wankers, with a big star around it. And but we ended up very friendly. I mean, Mike, who runs a company I'm very friendly with, and actually Sensible Soccer went out through their company. But ultimately, as a game developer, it's competition. I always say now, people say, look at the games industry, everyone's losing so many jobs. I'm like, well, if we're the only company making games, we win. So there's something in you that's still very competitive. So it's like this sharing, but not too much. And I think that's the way it kind of works. And that's the way we cooperate, but also push each other forward, yeah? That's how it works.
So when I was at Digital Creations, I guess our chief competitor at the time probably was NewTek. I don't know. We were like two companies doing pro-level graphics, not broadcast level, but stuff that, you know, if you were like making porn videos, you could access. But yeah, when going to the expos and trade shows and things, we would always hang out with the NewTek folks, and some of the guys that I worked with there had gone to college with them, and so there was the fun of hanging out, sharing stories, a certain amount of one-upmanship, just in the sense that competition breeds innovation. So there was never any, backstabbing or anything like that. It was, and the other thing too is the Amiga was such a niche thing that we kind of had to band together to make the whole environment succeed at all.
There were a lot of Amiga developers, especially in the early years, who were very, very small, operating out of spare bedrooms. Marco, I came to your dorm room. I remember I wanted to visit Marco because he was shipping software, and we were that small. Some of the pictures that I sent you, I left out the more embarrassing ones where
he sent me a picture,
the manuals,
which I'd never seen before,
are spread out all over the living room as we were assembling stuff. And to me, the bigger companies were. NewTek was operating out of. A shabby building in an industrial park, at the lowlands of Topeka. Even the bigger companies, very few of them had the fancy offices. Mm-hmm. As part of my job when I was writing, I would get to go visit some of these places, and some people were a little more well-funded, but we were all pretty small, and I think that built a lot of camaraderie.
ASDG began, our address was 280 River Road, Piscataway, New Jersey, Suite A. That was my home, my apartment. We then, when we shifted to Madison, Wisconsin, we were in a 1,600-foot auto garage. Ultimately, we took over the garage next door for 3,200 feet, and then two garages across the street. But always in a garage. And one of the business lessons I learned is if you look big, you're big. Doesn't matter what your surroundings are.
Exactly. Yeah. And now I was young. I was just programming day and night. But what I found the most remarkable about the Amiga industry and the beyond just developers and companies and all, was the entire ecosystem that was created by the community around this new platform. Brand new, knew everything. Everybody was on an even playing field when it came out. I mean, it was clean slate. And from the magazines to the DevCons were a little official, but the AMI Expos and the small computer shops who would go to these computer clubs, every meeting to both sell and learn. Was truly remarkable. In retrospect, I'm amazed at what the community built with very little support from Commodore.
So unlike you guys, I never actually had to compete with anybody because I wasn't selling my software. I just was either paid by Slack to continue developing it. And earlier than that, I had my job and I was just programming in the middle of the night. So, but still, in order to develop all this stuff that we wanted for Slack, we did talk to people because we wanted certain kinds of features. For example, when we adopted WShell, written by Bill Hawes, we wanted stuff that wasn't in there, and so we talked to Bill Hawes. And when we wanted to add stuff to the editor that we were using, which was TextEd by Charlie Heath, we needed to have a Rexport and all that. And eventually, we went to TurboText, but
Not SignaSed? I'm insulted.
No. Anyway, so we had to talk to Bill Hawes and to Charlie Heath, and basically whoever wrote the software, we would talk to them, and we would get our features that we wanted in there, and and we would talk to Commodore because we thought that the operating system needed to have certain kinds of features, and in fact, it was probably Marvin Weinstein, the theorist at Slack, who was the main face of Amiga at Slack at the time. I was just, Guy Fleegman, like somebody said yesterday in the panel, crew member number 6 in Galaxy Quest. But he talked to Commodore, and Commodore came and visited Slack several times. David Archambault, for example, was there several times, and And I think Slack had a big influence in getting Amiga Rex added to the platform.
I just wanted to pick up on a point John made about small companies, because in the game development community, this is a huge thing. So I set up a company, Sensible Software, with my school friend, literally in the spare bedroom in his father's house with Flintstones wallpaper on the walls. And that's where we set up our company. And so many disproportionate number of companies are set up by brothers. So actually in UK, we've got like Codemasters, not the Beermat brothers, they weren't really brothers, but Codemasters, Rare, Core, Probe, System 3. These are all companies founded by brothers in their house. Even here, my first experience, the first time I came to the States, we made a game, we came to see Origin Systems, set up by Richard Garriott and his brother here, yeah? So it started in small little places like that. But my observation was in the UK, we kept the teams relatively small. We grew to maybe 20 guys. When we came out to Origin, there was already like 80 or 100 guys. We couldn't believe how big it got, you know, because we tend to keep it small there. But yeah, the heart is in friends and family companies at the start of it, a lot of developers.
One thing that Willie said was just the accessibility for everyone, either developers of products that you used or possibly competed with or at Commodore. That was phenomenal, and I don't think you get that today. I mean, it's like you could talk to an engineer and get something done, or they could explain why they're not going to do something because, you know, whatever. But yeah, I don't think there's anything like that today.
I have experience, after Commodore, with both Microsoft and Apple. I became, for like 15 years, a Microsoft developer, and then iOS developer for apps that actually, sold 1 million units and all that. Still done out of my, back room or whatever. I had access to everybody. I have names, or emails from, Dave Haney, Jim Macros, RJ, Carolyn, normally, and the marketing people as well. The only contact that I had with Microsoft and Apple through developer conference, and then after that, that was it. So the access that we had from the actual developers was amazing.
Now, folks, we have 6 minutes, 58 seconds. I'm going to ask one more question. Let's make the answers quick so we have some time for questions from the floor. When Commodore ceased, on that day, half of our income disappeared at ASDG, then called Elastic Reality. Now, we were one of the fortunate ones because I said half. So a year before Commodore ceased functioning, started the process of porting to other platforms. How far in advance did you folks read the writing on the wall?
I think I was kind of in a state of denial up until the very, very end, but the Digital Creations in maybe the fall of '93 had kind of made the decision to move away from the Amiga, and I didn't want to do that. They were going to do PC stuff, which I had no interest in. So I turned in a resignation letter and just kind of started doing stuff, and then eventually got hired at 3DO. So that was, but I think the thing that maybe was the writing on the wall was the Orlando Developers Conference. Were you there at that one? Yeah. There were noticeable absences. Leo wasn't there because he was already at 3DO, and that must have been like. Even though I didn't want to see it, it was like probably the thing making me make decisions like that.
89, 90, I had some friends who started a small startup doing an Adobe Illustrator clone. I think I did maybe 50 or 60 hours of programming for them, just getting paid in stock. Made more money on that than I ever did in the Amiga market.
Interesting.
Yeah, the writing was on the wall, and we saw it probably a couple of years ahead of time, but I didn't lose my salary.
And yeah, Perry already mentioned that there was some writing on the wall. Clearly, I'd say it was at least a year before. We were talking about community. I personally kind of started noticing it when independent hardware vendors and software vendors were doing things like higher res graphics cards and coming up with the idea of the retargetable graphics and things that you would expect Commodore and those guys to be doing in the operating system and starting to make the platform future-proof. It wasn't happening. And once it started going over to, well, the community's got to pick up the slack and everything, and then you started hearing some of the business rumblings, from Commodore at the higher ups. It started to become pretty obvious.
Yeah, for us, we just get it down the channel from retail through publisher to developer. So, Sensible World of Soccer, our best-selling game, actually was released in 1994. So this launching on the Amiga in '94, the original Sensible Soccer in '92. But from our perspective doing business, we've got a new game, we go to a publisher and we say, do you want to buy this new game? Now we were commanding advances of around about £250,000 at that time. And we were probably the #1 Amiga game developer in Europe at this time, because we'd had all these hits. But they were pushing us to change formats. Go to 3D, go to PlayStation, go to PC. And they were offering us $1 million, 4 times more to move. So the demand came from retail. The retail says to the publishers, this is what we want to stock. Then the publishers come to us developers and say, this is what you've got to produce. So the demand came down from retail to basically cut the old platforms out and push to the new ones. That massive push by the early consoles is what really killed that. And PC kind of survived, but unfortunately the Amiga disappeared for us, which we were the last people in the world to want it to go, but it went.
So, gentlemen, I'm going to cut us off there, and let's entertain questions from the floor. Anybody?
Wow.
Oh, man. That's heartbreaking. Come on. Make an old man happy. Come on.
Who's got one?
Microphone, please. Oh, there's a microphone there. Okay.
So, Peter Cherna, I was obviously a Commodore, many of you know me, but I just want to talk a little bit briefly about the BICS experience. I mean, we were not officially tasked with being online since we were in the software development team, but it was important to us somehow or other, and even though we were working stupid hours writing software, we found more stupid hours spent talking to people, and we had to be careful in the flame war stuff. If you look at the Commodore answers, I think a lot of them were very clinical dissections and a little less hot-headed, although we had our hot-heads. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was, in the end, because the company was a little adrift from a product management point of view, that was also really important to figuring out where we should go. So we were trying to receive it, to be that and bolster, because CATS was great, but they weren't big, and obviously the engineers had deeper understanding of some of the stuff, although there were areas where I think CATS, like the whole Bob system, CATS understood better than anybody in R&D, I think, by the end of it. But yeah, it was a really important channel in both directions. And, I think I still have my award from Marco because every year there was like a best something or other, best contributor from Commodore. And somewhere I have the sheet in the frame, and you gave it to me at one of the DevCons that I remember, so thanks.
Microphone here.
While that's happening, I just got to say, this is a weird experience, because usually it's like seeing Dale and Peter and the Commodore guys up here when we're out there, so this is weird.
It is.
Okay, so I probably have a more, well, not necessarily unique experience, but I was an internal developer, developed a graphics library. Around 1987, I found this thing called X Windows and thought, that's really wonderful. We could get more connectivity. I was working with Ameristar, who had the internet, or the Ethernet board.
Yep.
And with the internet stack, or the IP stack that they had, and I thought we could really transform the Amiga to communicate with the other products or other machines, and you could run your real programs on a different machine and then communicate to the Amiga and display the results. So the X Windows system was the server-client model, which most people think is kind of backwards, and the server is really the terminal, and the client is the application that's doing the number crunching and then talking to the terminal. So around 1987, I left Commodore Amiga and started my own company, GFX Base, and eventually released the X Windows system for the Amiga, which was ran under Amiga DOS, because we had this wonderful preemptive multitasking operating system, one of the requirements for the X Windows system. We had a hierarchical file system, another requirement, and we also had an ANSI C compiler, and there was an IP stack, there was an internet connection. And with those four things, it wasn't difficult to port the official X Windows system source to the Amiga. What became more difficult was trying to integrate it with the Amiga Windows system, and what I ended up with was doing my own screen and doing all my own work that way, calling the Amiga routines. But since I kind of knew how the blitter worked, I could, and actually the X Windows system, their underlying code was very similar to the way the Amiga blitter worked, and so the first product was a black and white version. That came out very, very fast. But I was starting to see, getting back to the subject of seeing the writing on the wall, around 1990 or 91, I was starting to see, well, what's going to happen? I had sold side licenses for the X Windows system. I was already selling the 3-button Boeing mouse, the optical mouse, and thank you, and another opportunity came to me, which was NTG, New Technologies Group, which was a company that was, RJ, Dave Morris and Dave Needle, and they were working on this new wonderful, it's a CD-ROM-based game platform, and so I kind of moved away, seeing that there wasn't that much anymore going on with demand for what I was doing. But then when I was seeing engineers starting to look for jobs
Right.
from Commodore, and NTG eventually merged with 3DO and became 3DO. And I was talking to friends like Headley Davis, who says, hey, is there any jobs out there? And I said, you know what, we are hiring out here. And so there was kind of I think around 91 or 92 or 93, kind of a mass exodus out to California. And so it's like, well, how long they're going to be lasting?
So, friends, thank you so much for attending this panel. Unfortunately, time has exhausted, and once again, thank you, panelists, and thank you for being here.